Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Gui and I'm the Education and Industry Programmer at the Toronto Relation International Film Festival. Welcome to the Function of Festival in Crisis, our fifth panel in the Real Ideas Symposium on World Building. Thanks for making it through the festival with us so far. Please don't forget to vote for the Audience Choice Awards by rating the features and short films in your watch portal. Voting ends tomorrow, so get those votes in as there is a cash prize involved. Thank you again for being part of this panel. I would first like to begin by locating Real Asians offices on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat nations. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty of collective responsibility for the protection and sharing of land and resources. The offices of our festival's streaming platforms are located respectively on Takaranto in Dish with One Spoon territory, and also in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh on the West Coast. In the space of a digital symposium, and in the light of today's panel, I want to recognize the way development has historically been used to steal land and displace people, and how technology in very material forms is wielded to suppress, surveil, and inflict violence on Indigenous communities. In light of this, we hope to take up critical conversations on digital tools and spaces and interrogate the liberatory promises of digital futures. We encourage audiences everywhere to learn and remember the histories of the lands that they are located on. Here on Turtle Island, we recognize the numerous treaty lands, agreements, and unceded territories, and the ongoing work of Indigenous leaders and communities fighting for reparations and justice. We honor the work and follow the lead of Indigenous organizers, creatives, and communities that continue to give us hope, language, and possibility. For today's panel, we would like to especially thank the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund and Ontario Creates for their support of this symposium. Just a reminder that if you're watching live from our watch portal and want to ask questions, to send it through the chat or the type a question box. If you're viewing this from a cell phone, the chat will be at the bottom of the screen. I will now turn the time over to Marcia Maharani and Petrina Ng of Gendai, who will be introducing today's panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marcia Maharani. I am so grateful to be here. Thank you, Jasmine, for the introduction. I'm a curator. I'm an art administrator. I am a researcher. My work is informed by my position as an immigrant from Indonesia and a settler here on Turtle Island. Petrina?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Petrina Ng, and I'm the other steward of Gendai. I'm also an artist and an organizer and arts administrator.
I want to introduce our panelists today. I'm so thrilled to be here with amazing programmers and cultural workers today. I want to start with Nikki, the artistic director of Imaginative. Hi, Nikki. Wondering if you wanted to say a thing or two about Imaginative before.
Sure. Hi. I'm Nikki Little, Wabchimayangan, and I'm the artistic director at Imaginative. We just had our festival at the end of October. It was our 21st festival, and we went online this year and grounded the week in Indigenous gift giving, and also within curatorial practices, thinking about community and collectivity in that way. And we featured over, I think, 130 Indigenous artworks that varied from film, digital interactive, and audio. So that was really exciting. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you for being here. Next, I want to introduce Julian, programmer at Hot Docs and Planet in Focus. Hi, Julian.
Hi there. Thank you both so much for having me. As Marcia mentioned, I work for both Planet in Focus and for Hot Docs. I'm here wearing both hats. Hot Docs, my role there is principally actually industry facing, but for the purposes of this discussion, I am the programmer of a recently introduced programming strand at the Hot Docs Cinema called For Viola, which spotlights the work of BIPOC creators and BIPOC stories. And with Planet in Focus, I am a programmer with that festival. We also, like Imaginative, recently completed our 21st edition in October. And this year, we focused on stories that not only address environmental issues, but we're also explicitly concerned with environmental racism, Indigenous voices, and also the ongoing pandemic, which is inextricably linked to matters of science and expertise and collective sacrifice that are all applicable to the climate crisis as well. So it was only natural that we devoted a significant portion of our program to COVID-19.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Julian. And last but not least, I want to introduce Indu, Executive Director at SAVAC. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me. SAVAC is much like Gendai. We're a space, we're an artist-run center without a dedicated gallery space. So we partner with institutions, collectives, spaces, and everything in between from anywhere, actually, all around the world. And currently we have a show up in Burlington, and we have a show opening very shortly at Mercer Union, and we have a call out for submissions for Monitor, which is a short video and film program that we run once every 2 years. And we've been doing a lot of different kinds of programming since the pandemic hit.
Thank you.
Perfect. Welcome, everybody. So I just thought I would start with a little brief about how Marsha and I have been thinking about framing this conversation that we're going to have today. This is, a time when we're facing multiple crises simultaneously. Some are acute and specific to these current times, and some are long-reaching and multi-generational. Just off the top of our head, we're facing, the COVID-19 pandemic, racism, white supremacy, environmental violence, and a climate crisis, capitalism, neoliberalism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in the midst of all these simultaneous crises, Marsha and I have posed a few questions for our panelists to think about throughout the conversation. One, what is the function of a festival? And two, are we programming in response to crisis, or are our festivals, organizations, operations in crisis themselves?
And to that note, we have divided the questions today to kind of two sections. First, we're going to tackle programming focused issues, and then we're going to transition into operational, kind of trying to see where they match and make where the gaps might be between the two streams. So yeah, it's question one. What kinds of pressures are there to program in response to Black Lives Matter and decolonial work that you face in your work? And especially even if your programming or curatorial practice or the institution you are programming for is not equipped to initiate these discussions. I'm wondering if you can walk us through some of the ethical considerations that you make when put in these positions. Julian, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah, that was a really pertinent question to the introduction of For Viola earlier this year. And there was an extensive backstory to that introduction, which involved grappling with some of those very questions. In this case, speaking in the Hot Docs context, about pressures to program in response to the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement specifically, that was a discussion really that took place internally some months ago, where initially I think the organization didn't necessarily feel a specific responsibility to program in response to any particular event or political moment. Hot Docs as a documentary festival is perpetually engaged with political issues of the day, but rarely is there a sense of specific responsibility or mission or a particular preoccupation with any one movement or moment. And that actually inspired some conversations internally about whether that sort of non-committal position was viable and appropriate. And so this programming strand actually grew out of collective discussions within the staff about how Hot Docs was meeting the moment or otherwise. And it's funny that the Hot Docs sort of festival motto is outspoken, outstanding. And that generally is true of the films that we present, but as an organization, we haven't been particularly outspoken in the past. I think we've tended to adopt a notion that we are, sort of politically neutral, which I think we've seen increasingly is there's no such thing as neutrality, right? You are, if you are not actively taking a position, then presumably you are endorsing the status quo, tacitly at least. And so in response to this moment where we felt like Hot Docs wasn't as visible as it ought to be, given the cultural position that it occupies in Toronto and in Canada, we actively undertook to address the moment through our programming, and that resulted in the creation of this programming strand at the cinema for Viola that I mentioned, which specifically spotlights, again, BIPOC creators, looks at BIPOC stories, and is explicitly addressed to a BIPOC audience. And so for that reason, it's a free program and will always be free. Hopefully one day we can present it in cinema again when we return to physical spaces, but for now it's online. And it's programmed by myself and my colleague Donalda Brennan, who are two of the only Black staffers at Hot Docs. And it was important that we take an active programming role in the strand, even though that wasn't primarily what we were doing at Hot Docs. Again, I'm industry facing. And that has kind of entailed its own complications in terms of the responsibility and the perspective, I think, that we can bring to bear, but also the sort of workload and the demands that it places on us in addition to our other activities. And so it's been a balancing act, I think, to try to find space and time and resources to give the series its due, whilst also retaining sort of control and direct input over its forward course. So that's a long-winded response, but hopefully it gives you a sense of some of the conversations and issues that we've been grappling with at Hot Docs in recent months.
And to clarify, so are you juggling between like your programming capacity and For Viola and your industry-facing?
Yeah, very much so.
Role?
So my industry-facing role is, probably 90% of my time at Hot Docs, and For Viola is, I find time for that where I can. We have programmed sort of a season, 3 months, September through December. No, I guess that's actually, 4 months, including, so 3 features and 1 short.
What month are we in?
Exactly, yeah, November. So we sort of tried to, put a season to bed at a time, and that has given us a bit of breathing room to sort of figure out where the series is going to go from here. We're hoping to bring in a dedicated programmer to steer it forward, and that's all sort of depending on the outcome of grant applications and so on and so forth, which again, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with those particularities. But yeah, at the moment, it's very much an addition to my existing workload.
Thank you for sharing. Nikki, how about you in your role at Imaginative?
Yeah, I think, certainly some of the values or some of the policies that we have incorporated into our processes begin with our artistic policy. And every year kind of looking at that and revisiting what is happening in the current climate and engaging the previous programming committee as well as our internal team and our board to sort of see what the new reflections are and how do we need to adjust. Because I think for Imaginative, it's a little bit nuanced as we talk about indigeneity from an international perspective, especially when those definitions or self-determination differ from each country or each territory. And so, often we have those things that we keep in mind. And then also just in terms of like, I guess the immediacy of all of the things that have been impacting us since for this past year, we do ground ourselves with our elder that we have associated with our organization, Pauline Shirt, and go back to her for guidance around specific moments, I suppose, because at that time, public responses or public-facing responses are really important, and certainly, having to take a stand. And I think Imaginative, we've advocated and through our work, do that consistently. And so within the team, making sure that our work towards inclusivity or equity seeking spaces, or even just like plain anti-racist things, is just like being human and understanding our role within the collective culture. I think for the way I sort of view or ground collective responsibility in relation to other organizations, and what is our role and what do we do best, and how can we support or facilitate more representation, more opportunities, more opening doors and for spaces for people that maybe are also equity seeking. And so that's the type of work that we're kind of moving towards or continuing to do. And I think we had some really interesting programming this past year. We didn't do anything in specific. We had the submissions and had a lot of work that came through that were around Afro-Indigenous folks. And that for me was really wonderful in terms of just being able to engage with the artist in dialogue and sort of allowing that space for that artist to speak and to sort of create those cross-cultural or cross-conversational dialogues. And it was really touching and warming to hear what is happening in South America for this one particular artist. And so those are the kinds of things that we continually try to do within our role, I suppose. And then I want to double check that question again, just so I can get continuing to be like artist-centered, I suppose, for, as Indigenous focused, artist-centered, and within this pandemic, how can we mobilize our privilege to be able to still be a festival and to be able to be here? How can we get that back to the artists and ensure that those artists are still being represented, still being supported? Because a lot of the first, our content, our ability to survive, or our ability to be here and be present is reliant on artists and their creativity. And I think giving them space to articulate what they're feeling right now is most important for us. And then also ensuring that we're paying them as much money as we can. And I think that, a lot of people lost contracts, lost a lot of stability. And here we are online consuming. And I feel like artists were the first ones to give their stuff for free for just to heal the spirit or to connect people. And so, yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but just in sort of making sure that we're artist centered and we do have collective responsibility built into our practices, and then have an elder that really helps us ground around our values to ensure that we're kind of walking in the right way and understanding our role and what we're good at, and knowing that other folks are also good at those other parts, because I think we can advocate in different ways. And I think for us, for me personally, I think it would have felt really weird or insincere for me personally to program something just really quick in response. Whereas, like, you know, we have ongoing programming with Mi'kmaq African folks that are on the East Coast. And so, like, how can we develop programming? And I'm more of like a slow kind of long-term relationship person, I suppose. And so for me, that's kind of like, we've already done some steps internally. We have folks on our staff that, you know, that are Mi'kmaq African. And so just kind of like ensuring that we're doing right steps towards building community and capacity and networks and dialogue within those spaces.
Thank you. That's really great. I like this idea of always like checking in and regrounding also with your values and focusing on your role and what you do best, but also focusing on, like, you know, the artists and the why we're here. Thank you. Indu, what about your role at SABC? And just for folks who are just tuning in, the question is, we are curious about the pressures that exist in programming, quick response to Black Lives Matter and decolonial work, especially when your programming and curatorial practice or the institution you are programming for isn't equipped to initiate these discussions. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for the question. I would echo a lot of what Nikki's saying. I don't think that there's pressure to work in ways that are inauthentic. I think for me and for the conversations we've been having at SABC are around what feels like authentic connection. And before, you know, I think there was a lot of, I don't know if it would be pressure, but there was a lot of, there's a shift in the kind of discourse that's been happening. And I think that happened with the pandemic even more quickly, where there's a lot of mimicry on social media in terms of how to show a politic or an ethic. And I don't know if that's something that everyone needs to feel pressure around. There maybe was certain kinds of intervention around seeing what different institutions or organizations have been doing. But like, SABC's been around for 20 plus years, and we've had a variety of different relationships. We are a center that is devoted to programming work by people of color, for people of color, and we staff people of color. And we've always had relationships within the different kinds of diversity categories that have existed throughout the course of our history. And so this moment, if it's a moment, I hope it's not a moment, doesn't really change much for us. What it does change is, I think, it's not a change, but I think in terms of our organization, it's not about showing receipts, but building relationships. And that's something that we've been talking a lot about, like what are the relationships that we want to build with artists, and when are they meaningful? Because we have our very identity-specific mandate, and which has been getting wider over the course of time as we understand colonialism in different ways than maybe since the inception of the organization. And we're trying to create relationships across those understandings of colonialism. But we've been looking into our archives recently about how we've done this work in the past, solidarity work with different groups. And so, for instance, one program that we've been thinking about either remounting or revisiting in a contemporary way was a program that happened in 1997 between, it was a partnership with Tribe Inc., which is an Indigenous artist-run center, or was an Indigenous artist-run center in the prairies, and they have a very similar working mandate to SABC, and we had a 3-part series across the country that were in a program called Define Indian. And so it was a conversation that was happening between Indigenous folks and people from the South Asian diaspora. And there was a series of artistic programming, panel discussions, all centering around a film that Ali Kazemi made about Jeff Thomas. And that was like and what you saw within this film is this very beautiful way in which a relationship was formed, a friendship was formed between two artists from two different communities. So I think what we can think about is what is the role of art in relationship building, in inter-community dialogue, in terms of solidarity. So those are kinds of some of the ways in which we've been thinking about these questions, rather than going ahead and sort of putting words out there that don't necessarily match our actions. I'm much more interested in having our actions first and then maybe putting words to them later.
Thanks so much, Indu. I mean, all three of you have such like wonderfully generous approaches to programming. And Indu, what you were saying perfectly leads into our next question, is we're wondering about what you all think are the radical possibilities of arts programming. How can we see programming move beyond the festival or the exhibition and into the community? And how can arts programming work towards equity? And on the other hand, we're also wondering, like, what are the limitations for you and what are those boundaries? So I'd love to start with Indu. You told us a little bit earlier about SAVAC's new UBI project, and I think that is such a interesting example of like an experimental kind of role that an artist-run center can play in the community.
So just to be clear, it's not a SAVAC project. We are one of many people, or one of many organizations. And so just to give a background around some of the stuff is, so when the pandemic first hit, there was a lot of sort of organizational conversations around, like, what can we best do to support each other and support artists? And before CERB came into being, we were already having conversations within the sector around advocating for something along those lines. And when those ideas were in formation, a group of people came together to kind of advocate or push the agenda to make sure that CERB was going to capture as many artists as possible in terms of getting money directly into the pockets of artists. So that was a project that came under the umbrella of MANO, which is an umbrella organization. It's a Media Arts Network of Ontario. And then, so there was sort of conversations that were happening. And after that, we got together and formed and we call it an affinity group. So it's a group of artists and arts practitioners who are from a variety of different places in the sector. And we have a core organizing committee, and we've built this committee to sort of talk about how we can maybe post-CERB think about other ways of having money in the hands of and pockets of artists. And what we realized is, when we started talking informally to people, the informal impacts of CERB were far greater than I think anyone could imagine, like just in terms of mental health. And like the artists live often from contract to contract or from show to show, and just having this steady income really, like, people were like, this is the most comfortable I've ever been, and which is really terrifying to think about. And so what we've sort of came up with, like, as we saw that CERB was going to wrap up, and there is no end in sight of the pandemic, is we want to create a commission. And so it's called an artist commission, which is a play on words, because it's a commission in the way that like a government would hold a commission, but it's done by artists for artists. And so we're having artists testify about their experiences trying to make a living, and also being on CERB. And we have 4 commissioners from across four different disciplines. So we have musicians, we have visual artists, we have theater people, and we're going to have artists come and testify about their experiences. These commissioners will hear their testimony and write up a report, and then that report will go to the federal government before the next budget. And so the proposals that will come out of those artist testimonies will come from the community. It is a community sourced report that will be then compiled by these four commissioners. So we're trying to mimic a bit of a way in which a government body might collect data, but it's being initiated with the questions that are coming from us, rather than it being a top-down process of the government trying to put down questions. And so that's kind of basically where that's going. And I've been working on that for about 6 months, and we're nearing, there's a call out for artists. So if anybody wants to participate, I'll put it in the chat soon. And you can always contact us, and if you want to be a testifier for this.
Wow, that's incredible. I love the kind of reach out into the community that this kind of work does. Nikki, would you like to speak to Imaginative, like a festival that has such long histories, reaching into so many different communities?
Sure. So this year, I guess maybe there's a couple of projects that happened just this past festival that I'm pretty excited about. And especially one I kind of alluded to is just the grounding of gift giving this past year, and the giveaway. And so for me, curatorially, it was really easy I was really excited to ground it in this because, we do giveaways as from my community. They are quite nuanced, but we just thought about this idea about reciprocity and collectivity. And so for that, it was great to be able to mobilize and to be able to discuss in real tangible ways, like how we can, as I mentioned, like it was the highest artist fees we've ever paid this year. Our awards this year were able to mobilize over $50,000 to give away to the artists. So those were kind of the things that we're thinking about. And then also like some real things that are like, as part of a giveaway from my perspective and from my experience, part of it is like really practical stuff. Like it's like an honoring of you, it's an honoring of spirit, and it's honoring those who have come before and your community who supports you. And so that was, a really lovely sentiment for me. And so as part of that is really quite funny though too, because you can get some really practical stuff. Like I've walked away with the tea towel before at one of them. You're always fed, you're always kind of nourished in these different ways. And so we were able to connect with Sobeys and Northwest Company to actually give away $500 gift cards to grocery stores. And that's, for me, that was like something that came up when I was an artist. I was longlisted for the Sobey Art Award, and I had a baby. I had like a 2-year-old at that time, and I was like, on an artist salary, and I was just like, wow, I wish we kind of just got like money from Sobeys or like a really amazing gifting, because I need to support myself as a mother, as an artist, and so that really like helped us kind of mobilize those ideas and stuff. And then from this year, we had an artist named Asha Veeraswamy. And she did she has this project called Canote, and we did a social VR experience with her. And so she built this VR world and invited people to come. And essentially it's looking at like data sovereignty, and also looking at access, kind of like talking about access in different ways to technology and also to internet or those spaces. And, she has a marketplace on there. She has a place, she actually did her artist talk from this site. Everyone comes in, they go into the lobby. She had like a red carpet for Imaginative. You can take a selfie there, you make your avatar, and then you go on into the art space where you can mingle and network with other folks. You can actually and the idea is that like, we would like to work with her again to have like actual stalls where people can buy, because you can actually link up, have people there, and just think about ways we can connect Indigenous communities directly with each other. And just through, I used Firefox browser for it. And so it's quite simple to get through and to be social with folks. And so I think just her practice herself and just thinking about data sovereignty, because that's a space where, folks like Scott Winati and Jason Lewis have been looking at Indigenous futurisms for a while and those types of spaces, and thinking about territories in those ways. And I think that for me is really exciting, I think, because she's kind of bridging this way of storytelling, interacting, and also it is a real life, it's based off her real community at home, and she's part of the Seneca Nation. So for me, I was really, really stoked about that project and to see where it can go, because we'd like to, before we've historically done the tour, it was just like film and video, and certainly film and video lend well to an online pivot. And this year we're at a moment where we can think further through what digital and interactive is and what artists are doing and how they're storytelling. And then especially with the social VR, like what would a tour look like with her? Like how can we do more international, maybe community gatherings on the platform? And I just also think around like her development of the data and like who owns it and who's writing it and who is it written for, and all of those kind of larger ethical questions. Because I think we're all using platforms right now to facilitate our programming, but again, like where are these platforms existing? Who owns those? Where is the data going for that? Are all kind of things that artists are thinking about. And I really do think that Asha had really an articulate way of talking about it, and then also like bringing it to community in an accessible way, that people can start thinking about that and how they use data and the relationships to technology. So I'm pretty stoked about that project. And just those ideas that we had for the festival to ground in gift giving were really, I was really proud of the team for the way that they mobilized and were able to get all of those things together, and it would really like center it back to the artist.
Absolutely. I'm really interested, Nikki, in that bringing up ideas around accessibility with storytellers. I mean, not just for artists gaining access to platforms to share their work, but also thinking through accessibility on like a broader kind of community-focused endeavor. And so, Juliana, I was wondering if you'd like to talk a little bit about For Viola and how ideas of community and storytelling kind of run through this project.
Yeah, absolutely. Your initial question was about sort of opportunities for
radical
opportunities
moving beyond festivals.
Right. Yeah. And I was going to say, I think radical is a relative concept. I think for an organization like Hot Docs, which is a little larger, sort of a little more established in some ways, what we would consider radical perhaps would not be so for other spaces. But in our case, with For Viola, it was crucial to me that the series be freely accessible to all. And in preparing to launch the series, I was struck by how the presumption that the work we presented would be for a fee was actually restricting what it was that we could program. There were occasions where something might be pitched, particularly on the cinema side, and the response was that there probably wouldn't be a paying audience for certain types of content. Certain types of content were just not sufficiently high profile, or didn't have enough of an established following to generate interest to sell the tickets to kind of justify the program. And I remember sitting with that and thinking that Toronto is a huge city. There is every sort of community you could imagine here, and the idea that we were just serving or primarily serving an established sort of community of middle-aged, middle-class annex dwellers seemed like such a missed opportunity. And so when George Floyd was killed this summer, and there was a resurgence of activism and renewed conversation around anti-Black racism, that struck me as the opportunity to press this to the organizational leadership. And whereas before a pitch based on a free series, I think wouldn't have got much traction, there was a bit of a renewed moral imperative, I think, to explore these issues and spaces. And so I took that opportunity. And so, yeah, for Viola, a key component of it is that it is free to access and will always be so. So yes, this is Hot Doc's first BIPOC-specific programming series. Certainly at the Hot Doc Cinema, there may have been strands at the festival in previous years, but nothing at the cinema year-round, as far as I'm aware. It was imperative that it be free because, again, I didn't want there to be any excuse, in terms of the content that we could program, but then also, obviously, I wanted to ensure that we could reach beyond that existing community. Although it's been funny to see how there's already I think a degree of I think there's a preconception of what Hot Docs is and who it serves, and so simply making the content free hasn't necessarily been enough because people don't even think to look to us for this kind of content. So thus far, we've programmed 3 films. The first was a short film, Lessons in Justice by Karen Chapman. The second was Charles Officer's Unarmed Verses. The third that is screening this month is a film called In My Blood It Runs by Maya Newell, an Australian film. And those have all been freely available on the Hot Docs website. But just today, I learned that our members are not necessarily engaging with those films because they don't. There's this perception that if something's free, it's maybe less valuable, and so they're paying a membership fee and they're engaging with the films that they are in fact paying for, even though they're not, paying per screen. There's a members only section, and they think that that's where the value is located. So that's what they're engaging with. And meanwhile, the kinds of communities that haven't traditionally been accessing our content, haven't thought to look there because they don't know that it's happening yet. They don't know that it's available to them. So that's been the next challenge, I think, for us is, again, finding time and space to do outreach to ensure that people are aware of it, because the entire ethos of the program, down to its name, For Viola, is inclusivity. The name was inspired by Viola Desmond's experience of being arrested for sitting in the whites only section of a cinema in Nova Scotia, and we're trying to counterbalance that history of exclusion in some tiny way. We want this to be an inclusive space, and so we just we need to do more, reach beyond the audience that we've been serving up to this point, to ensure that we're not just kind of opening the door, but that we're actively ushering people through.
I love what you say when you said radicalism is relative. I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind, is the context and structures that we're all working within. And some of our institutions are more radical than others, but it doesn't mean that the radical work that we're doing is any less valuable, or it's just responding to different contexts.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your answers. Clearly, this has been a transformative year for cultural organizations by the output that you've produced recently. And but of course, like, inequity has been spotlit more blatantly in a lot of ways, and as we talked about earlier, like, working in the arts had always been precarious, especially when you're facing systemic racism and other barriers. Now it's even more pronounced. As Nikki was saying, artists are losing contracts, etc. And changing things to more of the operational side of your org. How has your organization been changing the way it's working? Or what kind of new labor responses are emerging? And what's its staying power, do you think? Nikki, how about you?
Sure. I think for us, you know, in terms of operations, again, looking to, I feel like, I guess I'm just trying to get my thoughts together.
Sorry to pick on you.
Okay.
I mean, I was really struck with what you were saying earlier, you know, how your organization is like taking the time to go back and reground. And I think this slowing down that had happened one time during the early pandemic and somehow is gone was really valuable in kind of this reorienting of operations. And I was wondering if you want to build on that.
So I think for us, like, you know, what Julian had mentioned before, like we totally gleaned off of you way early on, and we made a decision early on. Naomi Johnson, my executive director, made a decision earlier on for what we were going to do. We decided online back in March, I think. And so that was really helpful. And especially I think for just the mental, around maybe mental health, or just like around our office culture, to sort of have a goal and to have a focus towards how we're going to do this. And, you know, some folks had already been working with Cinesen, had come up already. And so they had done our closed captioning the year before. So we already had an established relationship. So we felt like, you know, just watch, just learn, and just to see what was going on, and ensuring that, again, that just not only are we artist centered, but that we're like that we are centered around our workers and ensuring that we can support them. And we were really happy to be able to find the funding, to not have to cut anyone, to be able to support everyone at their same wages and their same schedule. So that was really really helpful and helping us maintain forward momentum. And then also working with our elder to be able to just continually check in with her, especially around approaching, you know, within curatorial strategies. So I know for myself, I really do have to be careful in terms of my relationship to ceremony or relationship to these concepts that can be, you know, not to make a pan-Indigenous experience or, you know, take away from it, but I was happy that we chose something that I knew I could take from personal experience, and other folks had a similar or a nuanced practice of their own. And so that was really great to be able to think about that. And then because, you know, we do have a lot of public funders, and then also our big question was around sponsorship and around the private sector, and how can we still, you know, not convince, but convey this story and convey the values that we wanted to move forward, so that they would still be in support. And so that was really great. I think I have to give a lot of credit and kudos to our funding and foundations team to be able to mobilize and to shift the programming to hone in on those key values, to be able to still get our sponsorship up to those spaces. And again, like, to the awards was a really phenomenal gesture. And I think for us, we would really like to continue to that mark, which is a good task for us to move forward. And I think I'm really into slow culture, as I already mentioned, and slow consumption. And I felt like at the beginning, it was just like consume, everyone just go online. And I think I was happy that we had the time to be able to think how we wanted to move online, what was going to translate. And we do have a lot of different types of works. We have an in digital space too that accompanies the films in TIFF and cinema. And then we also have an extensive exhibitions program. And so we have usually around between 3 to 5 exhibitions that we mount in tandem with the festival. And so we were able to find a way to do that and to find the right platforms to like get them all lined up. And I think just in terms of moving forward, our communication strategy just internally is strengthened so much. And I think everyone was really nervous about that. And I do, like, not to get personal, but like I live between Toronto and Winnipeg because I have a daughter. And so it is like I do face, just, I guess, like as a woman, as an Indigenous person in the arts, and as a single mom, like different things. And I think for me, that was always a little bit nerve-wracking, but for me, the pandemic kind of helped ease some of those communication and instilled trust with one another in a different way that was really quite remarkable. And we are a bunch of overachievers, I think, at Imaginative, and I think did a good job in doing what we set out to do with it without, we have a motto, a part of our brand story, or part of our thing is just like, you know, with the canoe and walking through the bush, portaging, you know, you're going to get hit in the face with branches along the way, but we're all moving together and collectively we have to do the workload together. And so I think that really did come through this year. And I think just really happy about those communication strategies that we have now in terms of trusting our teammates and all of those things.
Thank you. Yeah, communication is tough, I think. I mean, with Katrina and I, Gendai, we started taking over Gendai just the day that lockdown started. So it's been entirely a Zoom production. Indu, how about SAVAK? How has the organization's like labor responses been in the past few months, and how are you moving forward?
In terms of labor, I think one of the things that we all recognize is that we have to we've always been trying to go slower, but at this point, it's like there's no choice. The conditions of our labor are such that we are put in a position in which we must go slower, just for the sake of our eyes, if not anything else, and our mental health. So that's definitely part of it. SAVAK, like we don't have a gallery space. We don't have any kind of dedicated exhibition space. We have a small office, which we actually share on the same section of the floor with Imaginative. So it's like funny to see Nikki after I haven't like seen her in I don't know how long. But we're in a unique moment, I think, that needs a lot of thought. And I would love for art spaces to start thinking about what are we going to do with all this empty space? Because we're not going to go back to business as usual. That's just how I think things are. And so moving forward, like I think we need to preemptively have some like really necessary, important conversations around space. For many years, SAVAK had put a lot of energy and time and effort, along with Imaginative, towards building a collective space in the center of the city in Toronto. And that's something that made sense at the time. It was in terms of finding affordable art space. This was like that was shared amongst a majority, and of course Real Asian is a part of the same space. So just to be completely transparent, so it was meant to be this extraordinarily diverse space housing diverse organizations. And right now we're not able to occupy that space. And so much of this gigantic building is sitting empty. And the pandemic is not just affecting the arts, it's affecting everybody. And, you know, as we see like homelessness at the most that we've ever seen it in the city, and we're hoarding these spaces, I want to start having conversations around like, what are we doing? What are our priorities as arts organizations and as active members of society? And how do we move forward rather than keeping these leases and like hoping for something to change that we don't have that much control over? Let's maybe start having conversations in a different way, in a way that's a bit more proactive, in which we can exercise agency and not wait for governments to say, okay, you can have spaces open. No, you can't have spaces open. Now you can. And like those, for me, I just am like a little bit like exhausted by waiting for something to change that doesn't feel like it may for a long time. And so how that relates to my labor is really important, because like part of my job as an arts administrator is to like keep paying the bills for spaces that are probably going to sit empty for a long time. And you know, we're holding on to these spaces because things are unnaturally high. Like prices are unnaturally high. And so we're keeping these spaces because we had good deals, and so these are just some of the questions that I've been thinking about and moving forward. Like, what are we supposed to be doing? Waiting for some like past, I don't know, glass half full, rosy vision of life to continue, or do we kind of rethink and have conversations across our organizations of how can we better support each other as workers in the sector, but also as people who participate in a larger economy within the city or cities.
Thank you for that. I mean, when you were describing this space that SAVAK and Imaginative and Relation is sharing, like, it sounds incredible, having worked mostly at institutions that are not very diverse. So it seems like an incredible support system and space for that. And yeah, it's strange to think that it may not happen again.
Well, and one thing I would add to that is, like, cinemas are sitting empty all over the city.
Yeah.
And cinemas are going bankrupt all over the city also. And these are huge open spaces. Like, there's just so much that could be done within the context of these places. So these are conversations that I think we need to be having. Like, galleries are huge, cinemas are huge. There's all of these places that are just like gathering dust in many ways, and like I think it would be unwise to allow that to continue for years on end.
Speaking of cinema spaces, Julian, how's your org doing? And I mean, did you also get any kind of slowing down now that you're picking up both programming and industry facing responsibilities? How are you doing?
Well, I think for us at Hot Docs and for me personally, the early days of the pandemic were really a blur because obviously things began to lock down in mid-March, and our festival is in late April. So we had about a 6-week window in which to figure out exactly how we were going to pivot. We had a few contingencies in place based on how we anticipated COVID might develop, but even those contingencies were, like a week or two old in terms of when they'd been formulated and when we had to put them into action. And so those early weeks were really quite extraordinary in terms of just the intensity of the effort that was required to pull off an online event, and certainly weren't sustainable, I don't think. Again, personally speaking, just the sort of round the clock effort. Obviously, putting on a festival or an arts event tends to be a bit of a hectic, concentrated experience at the best of times, but this was on a different level, and the fact that your workspace is no longer delineated by an office that you arrive at around 9 and leave whenever, certainly meant that work life, whatever the barrier that is traditionally between those two realms, completely dissolved. So yeah, early on it was super intense. As the pandemic has progressed, on the cinema side, we've settled into a digital offering that is we're sort of mindful of again, the existing community that we serve, and many of our patrons are members, and so we've tailored much of our programming to our members, and that we've created a large offering of films that are free to members, and that thankfully has been relatively successful. But there's no question that we haven't seen anything like the level of attendance that we would with our physical cinema. We were fortunate that Hot Docs had the experience of navigating SARS many years ago, and so we actually had some contingencies in place around our budgeting, and we've taken advantage, obviously, of the federal subsidies that have been available. But as a bigger organization, unfortunately, we did have to eliminate some positions, furlough some staff, and we are in the somewhat unenviable position of probably being one of the first festivals affected, and also, certainly I don't think we'll be out of the woods by this coming spring. So now we're figuring out, with more intentionality and more preparation, how we can offer our festival digitally or in a hybrid model, once again, in a way that is, tailored to the needs of our industry community, our public audience, and so on. But on the other side, I think that this remote working has sort of paradoxically fostered some opportunities for collaboration that might not have occurred to me in a more conventional work environment. So again, even something like For Viola was born out of some conversations between myself and some other colleagues that came about through these very candid discussions that we probably wouldn't have had in an office environment. And whilst phones have existed the entire time, I wasn't in the habit of calling my colleagues to talk through work stuff sort of outside of office hours. And we work in this very open plan environment, which doesn't lend itself to sort of creative conspiratorial efforts that may, depart from some of the organizational orthodoxy in some ways. And so, frankly, there's been this opportunity to have these almost like back channel conversations with colleagues that have allowed us to kind of plot and scheme and find ways to influence the organization in positive ways. So, yeah, again, I don't know how precisely I've addressed the question, but it's been a mixed bag, and there certainly have been some benefits that you might not have anticipated.
And on that note, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break. Maybe we'll scheme behind the scenes. Come back in 5 minutes to take audience questions. So in the meantime, folks, please write in your questions, and we'll pick them up in 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. While we wait for some of the Q&As to come through the chat, I'd just like to ask a question that is maybe about Gendai's current research right now. And so part of what Gendai has been looking at over the past year is the disparity between diversity in public-facing programming, such as diverse rosters of artists, and a lack of diversity in behind-the-scenes organizational staffing. So I'd like to ask our three incredible panelists, what are some ways that we can propose for making more space for diverse arts workers and leaders? I know that obviously SAVAC and Imaginative are forerunners in our sector, but I think all three of you would have a lot to offer. But maybe we'll start with Nikki.
Sure. Yeah, certainly we have, we prioritize Indigenous folks, but at the same time, we are really open to who is the best candidate and look at, consider who we have representing our advisories, our board of directors, as well as our staff, and be ensuring that, again, like, it is tricky. We do ensure we have like clauses in or clauses in within our submission processes, just because due to colonialization and impacts of colonialization, people are displaced from their indigeneity or displaced from their cultures in specific ways. And so we do take that into account and meet people at where they are on their journey personally. And so those are kind of things that we ensure that we have in all of our writing and in all of our, if we put a job description out there, that we kind of include those statements around. And then also we welcome, we have a really great representation, again, like I had mentioned before, on our team, which is really wonderful. And really I think it comes a really lovely, says something around like the arts community, because some folks have come through other arts organizations or those spaces. And then for myself personally, I think as an Indigenous arts cultural worker or artist or curator, mentorship, the way I've gotten here is really through mentorship through Indigenous women, and whether it is informal or formal. And so for the most part, it's been half and half, which has been really great, but really I call them my art aunties. And so those are just practices that I've learned trying to get my way here. And so in terms of that, I do try to practice that, and we do try to communicate that with our audiences and with artists and filmmakers that we engage with, that, if there is something that is a question for professional development, that we are here in that capacity as well, because that kind of work needs to be done. My dad told me this translation of how you say like where you are from is sort of translated into like, wherever I walk with those people from my land with me. And so kind of like that idea is sort of something that I carry with myself in terms of like how we're making space, especially, some people are really great in institutions. Like my friend Fran, she really loves the fight. She's a scrapper. She really thrives in institutions to like kind of dismantle and to make more spaces and to make more Indigenous maybe structures or epistemologies within those walls, I guess. And so I also look to like maybe mentorship programs, and whether it's an advisory or just, if I see a call out there that is for either, somewhere that is looking for inclusivity and it looks problematic, I certainly follow up with that and ask questions and ask them why they're doing these things. And I think that's just part of, once you get to these spaces, to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And not the right thing, but, just those things that are like part of you that you have to continue to ask questions, because no one's going to give you this space and you really do have to fight for it. And so those are the types of things that I like to include. And then also, I found just a key thing that I found, whether it's like a mentorship or someone coming into your institution, even in an Indigenous institution, the local politics are so nuanced for whichever organization. And it's hard to determine that when you're maybe creating a program where someone can get some professional development or have like a short curatorial thing. I think it's always great to have someone on the outside that they can talk to, that's non-biased, that can be an ally to them, that is, doesn't have, that is like just contracted on their own through the program. And I found that was a really great way, because I did come up, even within Indigenous organizations, that person maybe felt unsafe, or maybe there's some local politic that I couldn't not, that you don't really know unless you're on the ground there, living there, working there, especially for like maybe a national organization to be able to consider those facts. So I think those are kind of the things that we look for, and then I look for personally. So I still have relations with folks from youth to curators or artists that still ask questions, still we'll look over a grant, or, people that I know that are a little bit more experienced than me, I'll shoot them my grant before I hand it in, or just kind of that kinship system you have to build when being maybe someone who has consistently been othered for historically. So those kind of, I guess, underground spaces that that we had occupied, just continue to create those kinship systems.
And speaking of making space, Julian, I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on this, given your experience at Hot Docs.
Yeah, it's an issue that unfortunately is not sort of immediately under my power to influence to the degree that I wish it was. I am one of an unfortunately small number of racialized Canadians who work at Hot Docs. And in some ways we have more, we're more actively involved in fostering mentorship opportunities outside of the organization than we are within it, in a sense. We have our Doc Accelerator mentorship program, which is specifically for Indigenous or racialized filmmakers who are deaf or with disabilities, and it pairs them with filmmakers in their communities and pays them to do 200 hours of mentorship with those more experienced filmmakers. And there's nothing equivalent within our organization. And I can only say that, again, particularly after this summer, it's unfortunate that there needed to be a catalyst of the magnitude of this past summer, but we've seen sort of across the arts sector in Canada, there's been this belated reckoning with its whiteness, and there's been a commitment to address that in hiring going forward. Unfortunately, this is not a time where there's a lot of hiring happening. Obviously, we're sort of focused on retaining as much as we can, but growth has slowed. And at the senior leadership levels, it's a problem. But our new acting director of industry, Lisa Valencia Svensson, she is a woman of color, and I think wherever possible, our leadership is seeking opportunities to diversify. But it's there's a long way to go.
And Indu, what about you? I know that SAVAC does extensive mentorships, but also I love seeing so many arts administrators get their first job at SAVAC or other artist-run centers in the hood.
SAVAC has been a training ground for many different people over the course of its history, and I think that's something that we are very committed to. I wanted to address actually just labor conditions in general for women of color or BIPOC women across the sector, and it's pretty abysmal. And I think we need to admit to that. As there's been moves towards diversifying staff structures across the sector, there's also been that doesn't result in pay increase, and so often we see an attempt to diversify and a reduction in pay. And so, whose bodies are valued, whose labor is valued for what kind of purpose, I think is one that's really of concern to me. The other thing that I have noticed is, with all of these equity mandates that are being celebrated, it also puts a lot more pressure on BIPOC arts workers to step up in a variety of different ways and do very different labor than their white colleagues. And that's something that we need to kind of address, because our lived experience is monetized in some way, or actually not monetized, maybe is also another way of saying it. We're expected to provide our lived experiences as fodder and to make organizations look good, but not be compensated for it. And I think that this is something that is really of concern. And the other thing that I guess I want to think about is how do we create longevity of BIPOC workers within the sector? Because if you're working more for less money, there's a bigger chance of burnout and people leaving the sector. And so when it comes to mentorship, I find that I put a lot of energy into mentoring people who don't stay in the sector because the sector doesn't sustain them. And so while they might have like loving atmospheres within the few organizations that are identity specific, when people go out into the wider world, it's very difficult to kind of find the systems of support. And there's a lot of marginalization, as Julian said. You're often one or two of many working in an organization. And it's sad to me when Julian was saying, well, we had to, it took a pandemic for people to work outside the office to be able to have a conversation for certain programs to happen. Like that fact that you can't do that under the gaze of maybe your white boss. I'm not putting I don't know what Julian's experience is, but I'm just saying generally there's something about like the ability to propose things that I think are that's a bit nerve-wracking. And so, on the surface, you see a lot of celebration of different cultural communities, but is that being backed up behind the scenes? And are the employees that are making that work happen, are they forefronted? Are they being supported in ways that they need to? And I think that's a really major question that I have. And in terms of being an organization that employs only people of color, that this is something that I notice because a lot of people come to us informally for advice. And so this is like a labor that actually gets put onto an organization like SAVAC almost all the time, where like different people who work at different artist-run centers, especially, when we were all working in like one or two buildings, would definitely come to us for support on how to deal with their working environment. And so I don't want to keep those secrets. You know what I mean? Like that's also a labor. And so I just want to be really transparent that like, I think the conditions that exist on the ground for marginalized people, especially women, especially single women or single moms, like I think there's such an expectation of overworking all the time. And like that comes from a very specific perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your answers. I am overwhelmed by just how healing this conversation has been and how I feel supported. So thank you. And I will end with an audience question that maybe could sum up what we've all talked about today. Is that what does diversity mean in your context? And if based on what Indu just said, like maybe what is diversity and when does it feel like tokenism? Who'd like to start? Nikki, how about you?
I knew it. I think some things have maybe been spoken a little bit to. Certainly, I think sincerity in the relationship building for diversity for us, as I mentioned, Indigenous. The term Indigenous is self-determined, and so with that, really coming to do our diligence in terms of like what that means. So, sometimes we'll get some submissions where maybe we're not familiar with the community, but it's like we have to do labor, constantly to ensure that we're responding to our members and to our artists. And I think that self-determination part is key to that. And so that was really what we kind of just ground ourselves in, especially from an international perspective. And then also just thinking about like, kind of dismantling or dissolving colonial borders and ensuring that we're coming from it from that perspective as well. I know we do have to be conscious of where we get our funding from, certainly, but making sure that we have a good representation and practices that influence that. And I think just trying to be cognizant of it, and then also in moments of where maybe we get called out for diverse, like not being diverse, or for whatever, front-facing thing that maybe we do get feedback like that sometimes, just ensuring that we also do like a call in, whether it's a conversation or that type of work, to ensure that, people are heard from the community that we're serving. And also this year, kind of diversity opened up for me a little bit more, because when we did the giveaways, we had a couple of people maybe who aren't Indigenous that won, and they're like, I'm not Indigenous, can I win? And we're like, it's for everyone. And so that was really kind of exciting, just a little bit in terms of like a national scope around diversity, and also the communities that we were able to reach, because, my parents were on the res, and they were able to watch the programming, and they figured out what I do for a living. So it was that was also cool to see, like, spaces where like data, access to data or access to internet is really restricted, that we were able to figure out systems to be able to get to those spaces. So that was the kind of the things that we think about.
Amazing. Yeah, access for your parents is a big thing in the arts. Julian, do you want to tackle what diversity means to you?
It's obviously a big question, and I don't know that I have a particularly erudite answer, but I would say that inclusivity, again, is top of mind for me, and that, again, has been the watchword for Viola. But broadly, from Hot Doc's point of view, I think diversity means including and elevating perspectives that we haven't seen enough from historically, and that goes for perspectives within Canada and internationally. We're an international festival. We showcase a huge cross section of international films every year, and I think that diversity extends not only to the number of any given identity group that is featured in the program, but also reconsidering things like production values, sort of certain standards of polish that we take as given in the industry that may not be practical for filmmakers or artists working with different kinds of resources in different parts of the world. So that's an element of diversity that is important to me, certainly, and I hope to my colleagues in the programming team. And maybe I will just take this opportunity. There was one question that was sort of specifically about for Viola and whether it, what I think of its chances of being an ongoing commitment, or whether it is sort of this voguish diversity initiative that might go away when this quote unquote moment has passed. And I'll say that in that regard, this was a bottom up initiative. This was not an initiative that the festival decided was optically opportune and that they needed a BIPOC program stream at the cinema. This came out of the efforts of myself and some colleagues, and as long as I'm involved in the organization, it's really important to me that it continue. I think there will be a question when we do go back to physical spaces. In some ways, it's been easier to introduce it in a digital environment where there's not a discrete time slot that we are assuming at the cinema that could otherwise be used for another film. So I think it'll depend on the degree to which we get engagement from the community, and that really is the next phase, is making sure that we fulfill that element of our inclusive ideology of successfully inviting people in. So that's the next element of diversity that I'm preoccupied with now, is making sure that the audience knows that it's available to them and feels invited to access it.
Yeah, let's all watch for Viola. and continue this fight for the program. So, so it will be long lasting, right? Indu, closing words on what diversity means in your context.
Sure. I just also want to acknowledge that we've gone through so many different diversity regimes in this nation state that we live in. There's been multiculturalism, and then with the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and there's been so much mandated that one has to also think about how to be in conversation and bring in as much as we possibly can. And so that's something that's been really important to me, is just think about how to be in conversation rather than how to deal with representation, because representation is just one aspect, but actual relationship building is and comprehension and understanding of different groups, marginalized groups, is for me primarily the most important part of diversity mandates. And so that's I think my major impulse, and understanding that no one group is monolithic. Within each group there's so many different stratifications and tiers, and thinking about class is really, really very important in all of this, because so much of the way in which contemporary art is understood is within a classed perspective. And I think that there's just, this moment presents such an enormous opportunity to actually think beyond those things. And so that's something that I think we can hopefully start having conversations around. And specific to the South Asian community, I think there's a huge call to talk about caste, and that's something that is significant and important within within the South Asian context, and one that we take really seriously at SAVAC. So making sure that we have diverse conversations in terms of regional representation of what constitutes the very wide perimeter that we consider South Asia, but then also having the different stratifications that exist within that wide perimeter be a part of the conversation as much as possible.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, super grateful to be able to have the space. Really, I consider this as a mentorship for myself and Gendai as we learn how to navigate the art world. Thank you, Real Asian. Thank you for carving out the space. Thank you, Jasmine, for inviting us. And I hope we can continue these conversations.
Oh, apologies, I'm muted. Sorry. I just want to thank Marsha, Petrina, Nikki, Indu, and Julian for today's conversation. I think it's really hard to have such candid conversations on such, complex and difficult questions. And I think our industry often suffers from obscuring and not wanting to have these conversations out in the open. So I really appreciate the generosity that you've brought with you into the space. So thank you again. And thank you also to Anissa and Jamie from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Services. Thank you to Atif, our RI coordinator, for backend support. Thank you to our digital producers, Mimi and Joe. Tomorrow is the last day of the Real Asian Film Festival. We have one more panel and also the Scarborough live script read closing night event. So we hope to see all of you there. A reminder to vote for your favorite feature film and short film by leaving your star ratings in our watch portal. There is a cash prize for audience choice. And this is the first year where shorts are eligible to win audience choice. So please, please, please leave your votes. Our film forum on Discord will also continue beyond the festival, so please make sure to join us there for, year-round conversations and activations. So stay safe, everyone, and take care. Bye.